The tray came back untouched again. The fifth night in a row, Sophia Whitmore set the cold bowl on the corridor floor outside the sealed east wing of Ashfern Hall. 9 days she had worked there. 9 days no one had spoken his name above a whisper. The Duke of Ashfern had not left that room in 2 years, and the boards nailed across his door had begun to look like a coffin lid. She had £3 folded in her apron pocket for her mother in Bristol. She had a single black ribbon tied at her wrist. She had decided, somewhere between the 4th tray and the 5th, that no man, duke or otherwise, was going to starve himself to death on the other side of a door while she carried his supper away in silence. At dawn, she pried the loose board off with an iron candlestick. She walked into a darkness that smelled of dust and old wine and tore open the curtains. 2 years of night collapsed in one stripe of gray morning light. Julian Hastings Blackwell, the Duke of Ashfern, surged from the shadows with the silver burn down half his face and roared a single word at her. Out. She did not move. She did not lower her eyes. She set the bowl down on the table between them. But what she did next, with her bare palm, and a sentence no one in that house had dared to say to him. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. In the autumn of 1826, the rain came sideways against Ashfern Hall, and Sophia Whitmore carried the 5th untouched tray down the east corridor without slowing her step. The candle in her left hand guttered behind a cupped palm. The tray in her right was set as Mrs. Hollings had taught her on the first morning, 9 days ago. A covered bowl of beef broth, a slice of brown bread already gone cool, a small dish of stewed apple, a single pewter spoon laid at a precise angle. None of it had been touched since she set it on the threshold at 6. None of it had been touched the night before that, or the night before that. She knew because she had carried it back down each time herself. The east wing was boarded at the far end with rough deal planks nailed across what had once been the gallery doors. 2 years of damp had warped the wood. The nails wept rust onto the cream paint, and the cream paint itself had gone the color of old tea. Somewhere behind the planks lay the Duke's apartments. Somewhere behind those lay the Duke. Sophia set the tray down on the low oak chest beneath the boarded doors, as instructed. She did not knock. Mrs. Hollings had been very clear on that point. One did not knock. One left the tray. One came back at dawn. One said nothing. She straightened, and for the first time in 9 days, she allowed herself to look at the planks properly. The candle flame caught a smear of fresh wax at the seam, where someone had once tried to seal a draft and given up. The lowest plank had pulled away from its nail by the breadth of a thumb. A draft slid out of that gap, cold and dry and faintly bitter, like a room where no fire has burned since the last frost. She bent down without thinking and put her ear to the gap. Nothing. Then, very faintly, the creak of a chair shifting under a weight that had not moved in some time, and a slow, ragged breath that did not belong to a man who had eaten in several days. Sophia drew back. The dark ribbon at her left wrist had slipped. She pushed it up over the cuff of her charcoal sleeve and tied it tighter. Her mother had pinned that ribbon to her wrist the morning she boarded the mail coach out of Bristol, and the knot had not come fully undone since. She picked up the tray, blew out the candle, and went back down the corridor the way she had come. In the servants' kitchen the fire was low, and Mrs. Hollings was sitting at the long deal table with her hands folded over the iron keyring at her waist. The lace cap on her gray head sat slightly askew, the way it had sat since the funeral 2 years before. Her eyes were red, as they were every evening at this hour. She did not look up when Sophia came in with the tray. Sophia set the bowl back on the dresser and pulled the cover off. The broth had a fine skin of fat across the top. She studied it. "Mrs. Hollings," she said, "how long?" The housekeeper's right hand trembled against the keys. "How long what, child?" "Since His Grace took a meal." There was a long pause, during which the fire shifted, and a draught moved a dried bunch of lavender that hung from a nail above the hearth. "He takes water," Mrs. Hollings said at last. "Cook leaves a jug at the door at dawn. The jug comes back empty." "And bread. Sometimes bread. How often is sometimes?" The trembling hand closed over the keys to still itself. "Once in this past fortnight, perhaps. The loaf I left on the Tuesday was gone by morning. The one from Friday was not." Sophia set the cover back on the cold bowl. She did not speak for a moment, because the arithmetic of what she had just been told was the kind of arithmetic that asks something of the listener, and she preferred to know what it was asking before she answered. "He is dying," she said finally, not as accusation, as a fact placed on the table for the other woman to look at. Mrs. Hollings began to weep without sound, in the manner of women who have wept too often in the same chair. The lace at her wrist moved with the small shake of her shoulders. After a moment she said, "He gave the order himself. No physician, no clergyman, no light. The boards went up the week after Lady Eleanor was buried. By his own instruction. He has not been seen by any soul in this house since. Mr. Wren the steward speaks to him through the door on the first of each month, and the door does not answer. We were told. We were told. Told what? To let him be." Sophia took a clean cloth from the dresser and folded it once. "And whose house runs while he lies in there?" "Mr. Wren." "And whose purse?" "Mr. Wren." "And what of his cousin, Lady Fairfax? Does she write?" Mrs. Hollings looked up then, and what was in her pale blue eyes was not grief. It was the older, harder thing that grief sometimes leaves behind when it has finished with a person. "She writes," the housekeeper said. "She writes a great deal." Sophia folded the cloth a second time and set it down. She did not pursue that. She had been at Ashfern Hall 9 days. She had been told by the agency in York that placed her that the post offered £14 per annum, board, a half-day on the second Sunday of each month, and the laundering of one print dress at midsummer. She had been told that the work was light because the family was reduced. She had not been told what reduced meant. She had £3 left in a tin under her pallet, sewn into the lining for her mother's rent in Bristol, and she had counted on the position lasting through the spring at least, because Bristol rent in February was 9 shillings the week, and her mother's lungs would not last another winter unsupported. She knew, standing in the kitchen with the cold tray between her hands, that a household whose master starved himself behind boarded doors would not last through the spring. She knew this, and she also knew, with a separate and quieter certainty, that a man did not nail himself into a room for 2 years over an order he had given in grief. A man did that because somewhere in the house there was a person who did not wish him to come out. She thought of Mr. Wren the steward, with his ink-stained finger and his portfolio that never left his arm. She thought of letters that came often from a cousin in town. "Mrs. Hollings," she said, "the east wing. Who has the keys?" "There are no keys. The doors are boarded. And the door inside, the one to his bedchamber. He bolted it himself on the inside." "Then how is the broth meant to reach him?" "It is not meant to reach him," the housekeeper said. "It is meant to be offered." Sophia considered that sentence. It was, she thought, the kind of sentence one used in a house that had given up. The tray was a ritual. The tray was a way for the staff to say, each evening, that they had done their part, and to lay the blame for the empty stomach beyond the door on the man who had asked for the dark. She picked up the tray again. "I will take it back up. He will not eat it. I know." "Then why?" "Because tonight I should like to know the shape of the door." Mrs. Hollings did not understand, and Sophia did not explain. She lit a fresh candle from the hearth, settled the tray against her hip, and climbed the back stair to the east corridor for the second time that night. The planks were as she had left them, the lowest one still pulled away from its nail by the breadth of a thumb. She set the tray down. She set the candle on the chest beside it. Then she knelt in her charcoal skirt on the cold boards and worked her fingers under the loose plank. It came away from the lower nail with a soft tearing of dry wood, not all the way, enough for her to slide her hand through up to the wrist and feel the cool, undisturbed air of the gallery beyond. She withdrew her hand at once. She pressed the plank back into place. She rose, brushed her skirt, picked up the tray and the candle, and stood for a moment with her ear turned toward the dark wood. The breathing was still there. It had not changed pitch when the plank moved. The man behind the boards either had not heard or no longer cared what was heard. She thought, he no longer cares. She thought, tomorrow at dawn I will not bring broth. Tomorrow at dawn I will bring soup that has been kept hot. She went back down the corridor for the second time, and this time, when she passed the long window at the head of the back stair, she paused. The rain had thinned to a fine mist. Below in the courtyard a single lantern moved between the stable and the side door, swung by a thin figure in a tobacco-brown coat whose stride she already knew. Mr. Wren was crossing from the steward's office toward the kitchen, with his portfolio under his arm and a folded paper in his free hand. He did not look up, he never did, but Sophia, watching from the unlit window above, saw him pause at the side door, glance once over his shoulder at the dark bulk of the east wing, and tuck the folded paper deeper into the breast of his coat before he stepped inside. She marked the gesture. She did not yet know what it meant. She marked it all the same. In the morning the rain had stopped, and a thin yellow sun came in low across the park. Sophia was up before 5. She drew the kitchen fire herself, set a small iron pan over the trivet, and warmed a measure of cream with a knob of butter, a sprinkle of salt, and the soft inside of a fresh loaf torn into small pieces. It was what her mother had given her when fever had kept her from eating as a child. It was what one fed a body that had forgotten how to want food. She did not put broth on the tray. She did not put apple. She put the bowl of bread and cream, covered, and a single tin spoon, and nothing else. Mrs. Hollings watched her from the doorway without speaking. "There is no need to come up with me," Sophia said. "There is every need." "Then come." They went up together. At the boarded doors, Mrs. Hollings stopped 6 paces short, as if a line had been drawn there she had not crossed in 2 years. Sophia walked the last 6 paces alone and set the tray on the chest. She did not knock. She bent and worked the loose plank free again, this time fully, and laid it without sound against the wall. The gap was a hand's breadth, enough to pass the bowl through, enough to pass a candle through, enough, if one were determined, to pass a person of slight frame and a steady nerve, although Sophia did not intend, yet, to pass a person. She slid the bowl through onto the floor of the dark gallery beyond. She slid the spoon after it. She set the cover beside them so the warmth would hold a little longer. Then she straightened, looked once at Mrs. Hollings standing 6 paces back with both hands at her mouth, and spoke to the gap in the boards in the same clear, unraised voice she had used the night before in the kitchen. "Your Grace, there is bread softened in cream by the door. It is warm. It will not be warm in a quarter of an hour. After that it will be cold, and you will not want it, and I will have wasted good cream." She waited. Nothing answered. The slow, ragged breathing did not change. "I do not intend to do this every morning at my own expense," she went on, in the same tone. "I am paid £14 the year, and I send 11 of it to Bristol. If you do not eat, the house will fall, and Mr. Wren will turn me out at the quarter day, and my mother will not have her rent. I should rather you ate." Still nothing. She picked up the plank. She fitted it back into its nails. She pressed it home with the heel of her hand until the seam closed. Then, as she turned to leave, she heard, very faintly through the wood, the sound of a tin spoon being lifted from a wooden floor. She did not allow her face to change. She walked past Mrs. Hollings without speaking and went down the back stair with her empty hands folded in front of her, and her heart, which had been steady through the whole exchange, began to beat hard only when she reached the kitchen and was alone. By noon, she had been summoned to the steward's office. Mr. Wren did not rise when she came in. He sat behind a green baize desk with his portfolio open at his elbow and his ink-stained right index finger resting on a column of figures. The watery brown eyes that never settled flicked once across her face and then away. "Whitmore," he said, "it has been reported to me that you went into the east corridor last night and again at dawn." "Yes, sir. Mrs. Hollings's instructions were that the tray is to be set and left." "It was set and left, sir." "And the boards? Were the boards interfered with?" She did not answer at once. She watched the ink-stained finger lift very slightly from the column and settle again. "The lowest plank is loose, sir," she said. "I noticed it last night. The nail has rusted through. You will not notice it again." "No, sir." "His Grace has given orders. Those orders stand. The household runs on those orders. Do you understand me, Whitmore?" "I understand you, sir." He looked at her then, for the first time, properly, and what was in the watery eyes was not displeasure. It was calculation. He was measuring, she thought, what kind of girl had walked into his house 9 days ago and revising the figure upward, and not pleased by the revision. "You may go," he said. She went. In the corridor outside his office she paused and pressed her back to the paneling for the space of 3 breaths. Then she straightened the dark ribbon at her wrist, smoothed the white apron at her waist, and walked back toward the kitchen. because there was bread to be set for the servants' supper and a fire to be banked, and because she had already decided, somewhere between the steward's desk and the closing of his door, that she would carry the tray again that night, and the night after, and every night until the man behind the boards either opened the door himself or died, and that if Mr. Wren wished to turn her out at the quarter day he would have to find a reason that did not appear in his own ledger. That evening, when she climbed the back stair for the third time with a covered bowl of warm bread and cream, the bowl from the morning was sitting empty on the gallery side of the gap, pushed back through the loose plank into the corridor. The tin spoon lay beside it, wiped clean. There was no note. There was no sound from beyond the wood, but the bowl had been pushed back, and the spoon had been wiped, and these were the gestures of a man who had not yet finished deciding whether he wished to live. Sophia knelt and picked them up. She set the fresh bowl in their place. She did not speak this time. She fitted the plank home, smoothed her skirt, and went down the back stair with the empty bowl warm against her palm. At the head of the stair she paused once more by the courtyard window. Below, in the same low lantern light, Mr. Wren was crossing again from the steward's office toward the side door, and this time he was not alone. A closed carriage stood in the courtyard, lamps lit, horses steaming in the cold. A gloved hand was visible at the carriage window, holding a folded paper out to him. "Cream kid, very fine," the cuff embroidered. Mr. Wren took the paper. He bowed once to the carriage window. The hand withdrew. The carriage moved off without a name being called and without a door being opened, and Mr. Wren stood for a long moment in the courtyard, with the folded paper held against the breast of his tobacco-brown coat, exactly as he had stood the night before. Sophia watched until the carriage lamps had gone out beyond the gatehouse. Then she went down to the kitchen with the empty bowl in her hands, and a name she did not yet know turning slowly over in her mind, the way a key turns in a lock that has not been opened in a very long time. By 4 in the morning, Sophia was already awake. She had not truly slept. The narrow servant's cot creaked beneath her as she rose and dressed in the dark by feel. The charcoal gray wool to the ankle, the white apron tied twice at the waist, the plain cap pinned over the low coil of her hair. She knotted the black ribbon at her left wrist last and pressed her thumb against it the way some women press their lips against a crucifix. The corridor outside her room was cold enough to hurt the teeth. She carried no candle. After 9 nights at Ashfern Hall, she knew the staircase by the count of its boards and the small lift in the 7th tread. Down in the kitchen, she set the copper pan on the lowest hook above the banked embers and stirred the fire alive with care, the way her mother had taught her in Bristol. She did not want the cook to find her here. She did not want anyone to find her here. She made the broth herself this time: marrow bones from the larder, a single onion, 3 peppercorns, salt, the heel of a loaf softened in the liquid. No herbs the kitchen would miss. She let it tremble at the edge of boiling for nearly an hour, while the windows above the scullery turned from black to the color of weak tea. When the bowl was ready, she covered it with a clean linen, set it on the smallest tray, and added a heavy iron candlestick from the dresser, a thing meant for the chapel, ugly and useful. She wrapped its base in a second cloth so it would not clatter against the porcelain. She climbed the back stairs to the east wing in a steady rhythm. No hurry, no hesitation. A woman with £3 in a tin and a mother in Bristol could not afford either. The boards across the door of the east wing corridor were as she remembered them: 5 planks nailed in rough X, the nails black with age, the wood pale where Mrs. Hollings's apron had brushed against it morning after morning for 2 years. Sophia set the tray down on the floor and ran her fingers along each plank until she found what she had marked the night before with her thumb. The second from the bottom, where the nail had eased from the frame a 1/4 of an inch, leaving a crescent of brighter wood beneath the head. She took up the iron candlestick. She slid its foot behind the loose plank. She braced one knee against the wall, drew a single breath, and pulled. The nail gave with a small, dry shriek. She caught the plank before it could fall. She laid it down without sound, lifted the second plank free in the same way, then the third. The cross of nailed wood became a doorway. The brass handle of the chamber beyond glinted faintly in the dimness of the hall. She picked up the tray. She pushed the door open with her hip. The smell met her first: old smoke, candle tallow gone rancid, brandy soaked into upholstery, the sour ghost of food long removed. Beneath it, the heavier note of a man who had not been bathed in days. She did not flinch. She had nursed her father through the lung fever the year before he died, and there were smells worse than this. The room was vast. It took her eyes a moment to understand its shape in the dark. A great four-poster bed against the far wall, hangings of bottle green velvet drawn shut. A cold hearth choked with 2 years of ash. A writing desk crowded with bottles, some standing, some toppled. 2 armchairs by the unlit fire, one collapsed on its side. Heavy damask curtains drawn floor to ceiling across what she judged to be 3 tall windows, the seams nailed to the frame. A single candle guttered on a saucer beside the bed. By its weak amber she could just make out the shape of him among the pillows. One bare forearm flung across his eyes, the wrist heavy with the silver of an old scar. She set the tray down on the writing desk. She set the iron candlestick beside it where her hand could find it. She crossed to the nearest window. The curtains were stiff with dust. She gathered the heavy folds in both fists and pulled. They resisted, then surrendered with a gray breath that made her cough once into her shoulder. A row of fresh nails ran down the seam of the inner shutter, fixing it to the frame. She set the foot of the candlestick against the lowest one and pried. The nail came out with a small report like a pistol cap. She heard the bed move behind her. She did not turn. She pried the next nail, then the next. The fourth gave with a louder snap and the shutter swung outward an inch on its hinge. "Who?" said a voice from the bed. It was a voice that had not been used at full volume in a long time. Hoarse at the lower notes, frayed at the top. It belonged to a man who had been startled out of a dream he did not wish to leave. "Sophia Whitmore, Your Grace," she said. She did not look around. "I brought broth. Get out." In a moment. She drew the last nail. She folded back the inner shutter. Behind it, the outer shutter was already loose, its latch broken years ago. She set her palms flat against the wood and pushed. The window opened on its old hinges with a long, low groan. The dawn came in. It did not come in gently. October in Yorkshire was clean and white and merciless, and the light that poured across the windowsill that morning was the color of new milk. It spread across the dusty boards. It lit the toppled bottles on the desk and turned the brown glass amber. It climbed the bottle green hangings of the bed and showed every patch where moth had been at the velvet. It reached the pillows last, and then he screamed. It was not a refined sound. It was the wordless tearing cry of an animal lifted out of a deep burrow, and it broke in the middle on the single English syllable he had used for 2 years. Out. He was sitting upright now. He had wrenched a pillow over the right side of his face and held it there with the stiff fingers of his right hand. With his left he was groping along the bedside table for something. A bottle, a bell, she could not tell. His eyes were screwed shut against the light. His chest above the open linen shirt was rising as if he had just run a mile. "Out," he said again. "Damn you, girl. Out. Hollings, Hollings." "Mrs. Hollings is at chapel, Your Grace." She said it evenly, the way she had once spoken to a horse that had bolted. "She comes at 6. It is not yet 5. Get out. I shall when you have eaten." He lowered the pillow half an inch. The gray eye she could see was watering hard. The pupil shrunk to nothing in the unfamiliar light. He blinked once, twice, and the eye fixed on her at last, with the bewildered fury of a man who had not been looked in the face for a very long time. "Who let you in?" "No one, Your Grace. I let myself in. The boards are on the floor of the corridor. I shall nail them up again before Mrs. Hollings comes, if that is your wish. But you will eat first." He stared at her. The pillow slid down to his lap. The right side of his face came into the morning light for the first time in 2 years, the silver-ridged sheet of burn that climbed from his jaw to his temple and disappeared into the disordered dark hair, the place where the eyebrow no longer grew, the descent of the same scar down the side of the neck into the open collar. The left side of his face was still that of a young man. The contrast was the cruelest thing about him. She looked at him. She did not look away. She did not soften her mouth into pity. She simply looked, the way one looks at a wall that must be measured before it can be plastered. He saw her looking. His left hand closed convulsively around the pillow. For one moment she thought he would hurl it at her. He hurled the candlestick from the bedside table instead. It struck the wall a foot from her shoulder and rang like a small bell against the paneling before it fell. She did not move. "I brought broth," she said again, and her voice was no different than before. "Marrow and onion. It is hot. If you do not eat it now, it will be cold in 10 minutes, and then I shall have wasted an hour of fire, which I cannot afford." There is bread in the linen. I shall set it on the desk and open the second window. Then I shall go." She turned her back on him. She crossed to the second window. She drew the curtain. She pried the nails. She heard him breathing behind her, loud and ragged, but he did not throw anything else. The second window opened on a view of the kitchen garden gone to seed, and beyond it, the long gray shoulder of the moor. A thrush was singing somewhere in the wet hedge. She had not heard a thrush from this side of the house before. She left the third window for tomorrow. When she turned, he had lowered the pillow entirely. He was sitting on the edge of the bed now, the moss-green velvet robe drawn across his lap as if for decency, both bare feet on the cold boards. His head was bowed. The morning light fell on the crown of his disordered hair and on the scarred shoulder where the linen shirt had slipped. His left hand was pressed flat over his eyes. "I cannot see," he said. The fury had gone out of his voice. What was left was simply tired. "You have blinded me, you stupid girl. It will pass in a quarter of an hour. Your eyes have forgotten the sun, that is all. Mine were the same when I came up from the kitchen the first morning. I did not ask for a lecture. No, Your Grace, you asked for me to get out. I shall, in a moment." She lifted the bowl from the tray. She carried it to the small table beside the bed, set it down, laid the spoon parallel to it, set the bread on its linen beside the spoon. She did all of this within arm's length of him, slowly, the way one sets feed before a beast that has not yet decided whether to bite. He did not raise his hand from his eyes. "Why?" he said. She paused with her own hand still on the rim of the bowl. The question had been so quiet she almost missed it. "Why what, Your Grace? Why are you not afraid?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Outside, the thrush sang again. The new light from the second window crept across the boards and touched the toe of his bare foot. "Because you have not given me a reason to be, Your Grace. You have shouted, you have thrown a candlestick. My father shouted louder when the lung fever took him, and he threw a kettle at the doctor. The doctor came back the next morning. So shall I." He lowered his hand at last. He looked at her. Both eyes now, gray and reddened, the right one watering down the silver ridge of the scar as if the cheek itself were weeping. "Get out," he said, but it was no longer the same word. The bark had gone out of it. It was almost a request. "Eat first, after, now. The bread will go cold against the bowl. You will sit down properly. You will take the spoon in your left hand. I shall be at the door." She moved to the door. She did not close it. She stood with her hand on the frame and her back half turned, the way a groom stands at the head of a nervous mount with the bridle slack, present but not pressing. For a long moment nothing happened. The thrush sang. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock began to strike 5. Then she heard the small dry scrape of a spoon against porcelain. She did not turn to watch. She listened. One spoonful, a pause, another, a pause longer than the first, in which she imagined the heat of it traveling down a throat that had drunk nothing warmer than brandy in 2 years. A third spoonful, a small ragged breath, almost a cough, almost a sob, a fourth. When the bowl had been quiet for the space of perhaps 2 full minutes, she risked a glance over her shoulder. He was sitting with both hands curled around the empty bowl. His head was bent over it. The morning light fell across the burned half of his face without flinching, and he was not flinching either. The bread lay untouched on the linen. "Tomorrow," she said, "you will have the bread also." He did not answer. "And I shall open the third window." He raised his head. The gray eyes met hers across the room, exhausted, very awake. "You will not open the third window," he said. "You will open one a day, no more." It was the first sentence he had spoken to her. That was not an order to leave. She understood at once that it was a contract. "One a day, Your Grace, and 1 bowl. We have a bargain." "We have nothing of the kind." "As you wish." She bent and picked up the iron candlestick from where it had fallen by the paneling. She set it back on the writing desk among the bottles. She picked up the tray with the empty bowl and the untouched bread. "I shall come at the same hour," she said. "I shall bring water also, and a clean shirt, if Mrs. Hollings will let me have one from the press. You need not speak to me. You need only eat. I have not given you leave." "No, Your Grace, you have not." She inclined her head, not the deep mesura of a frightened maid, but the brief grave nod of a woman who had finished what she came to do, and stepped through the door. She drew it shut behind her with both hands so that it made no sound. In the corridor, she stood for a moment, with the tray against her hip and her forehead resting on the cold wood of the doorframe. Her knees were trembling. She had not let him see it. She did not let herself feel it now for longer than the space of one breath. Then she knelt and gathered the 3 pried planks from the floor. She did not nail them back across the door. She carried them down the back stairs under her apron, one at a time, and laid them flat behind the kindling box in the scullery, where no one would think to look for them. If Mrs. Hollings asked, she would say the nails had finally rusted through. If Mrs. Hollings did not ask, she would say nothing. In the kitchen, the cook was already up, kneading the morning bread with her sleeves shoved past her elbows. She looked at Sophia and at the empty bowl on the tray, and her hands went still in the dough. "He ate," Sophia said. She set the bowl in the sink. Mrs. Pence, the cook, crossed herself, very slowly, leaving a small print of flour on the front of her apron over the heart. "Holy Mother," she whispered, "Holy Mother of God. Marrow bones, an onion, salt, the heel of yesterday's loaf." Sophia rolled her sleeves to the elbow and reached for the apron she kept on the hook by the dresser. "I shall make it again at 4 tomorrow. You did not see me. I did not see you, child. And I shall need a clean shirt from the press, white linen, the plainest you have." Mrs. Pence looked at her for a long moment with the dough forgotten in her hands. There was something in the older woman's face that Sophia could not name. Fear, and something older and warmer than fear. "There is a press in the second-floor linen room," Mrs. Pence said at last. "His own shirts. 24 of them. Mrs. Hollings has not touched the drawer in 2 years. She washes them once a quarter and folds them back unworn. Take what you need. Tell no one." "Thank you." Sophia carried the tray to the scullery and began to wash the bowl in water she had warmed herself. Through the small high window above the sink, the sky had gone from milk to a clean pale blue. Somewhere on the upper floor, a single window stood open to that sky, and behind it, a man who had not eaten in 3 days was sitting on the edge of his bed with both hands curled around the warmth of an empty porcelain bowl, and was beginning, very quietly, to weep. She did not know that he was weeping. She knew only the shape of his shoulders as she had left them, and the small dry scrape of the spoon, and the weight of the iron candlestick where her thumb had pressed against it through the wool of her apron. She dried the bowl. She set it on the shelf with the others, where no one would notice it. She climbed the back stairs once more, this time with a folded white shirt over her arm, and a tin pitcher of clean water in her other hand, and the morning sun coming sideways through the long landing windows lit the black ribbon at her wrist, and the firm dark line of her jaw, and the small, almost imperceptible smile at the serious corner of her mouth. Above her, on the floor she was climbing toward, a door that had been nailed shut for 2 years stood quietly open by the width of a hand. And below her, in the gravelled drive that swept up to the south front of Ashfern Hall, the early carriage of Lady Caroline Fairfax was already turning in between the stone gateposts, 3 days earlier than expected, with the Wedgwood blue ribbons of its lamps fluttering against the cold October air. Sophia stopped on the landing with the iron candlestick still warm in her palm and listened to the wheels grinding the gravel below. The blue lamp ribbons fluttered past the holly. She counted 3 breaths, then 4, and made her decision before the 5th. She would not warn the house, not yet. She turned away from the window and walked the long corridor of the east wing toward the door that stood open by the width of a hand. The boards she had pried off the night before lay stacked against the wainscot like the bones of an old animal. Inside the room, somewhere in the slatted dark, a man was breathing as though each breath cost him a coin. She pushed the door wider with her shoulder. The light from the corridor crossed the threshold in a long, pale wedge. It fell across the wine-stained green robe heaped on a chair, across the cold tray she had left at dawn, across the bare foot of the Duke of Ashfern, where he stood beside the bedpost with one hand braced on the carved oak, as if the floor itself were treacherous. He turned his head toward the sound. The scar caught the corridor light, silver and ridged, climbing from jaw to temple in a slow river. His steel-gray eyes did not find her. They searched a yard to the left of her shoulder. "You came back," he said. "I bring breakfast, Your Grace." "You should not have come back. And yet here I am." She set the candlestick on the writing table. "There is a carriage in the drive, Lady Caroline Fairfax, 3 days early." The name moved through him before he could school his face. The hand on the bedpost tightened until the knuckles went bone white. The 3 stiff fingers of his right hand did not bend with the others. They lay across the wood like spokes of a broken wheel. How do you know her ribbons? Mrs. Hollings has described them. The blue is famous in this house. Famous? He repeated, and the word came out dry. She crossed to the long sash window and unlatched it. Cold October air spilled into the room and lifted the dust from 2 years of stillness. He flinched, as if she had struck him. She did not stop. She set the bar, propped the casement, and turned back to him with her hands folded at her apron. 1 window a day, Your Grace. That was the bargain. There was no bargain. There is now. He moved. He moved with the speed of a man who had once been quick and had not forgotten the shape of it, even blind in his own house, even half-starved. 3 long strides and his good hand closed on her upper arm and walked her backward until her shoulders met the cold paneled wall between the window and the chimney-piece. The robe slipped from his shoulder. The scarred side of his face came down toward hers until she could feel the heat of his breath and smell the bitter green of old laudanum on it. "Look at me," he said. She looked. "Look properly." She did. The burn ran from his temple along the jaw, a slow silver tide that had eaten the corner of his mouth and crossed the throat in pale rivulets to vanish under the open collar of the linen shirt. The right ear was a small puckered shell. The lashes on that side were gone. Where another woman might have closed her eyes, Sophia kept hers open and very steady, and after a long moment she lifted her right hand from her side and laid the palm flat against the worst of it, just under the cheekbone, where the skin gathered into a knot like wax cooled in haste. He made a sound that was not a word. "I have seen worse, Your Grace," she said. The voice was low and entirely her own. "Sit down and take the soup before it sets." The room held its breath. His good hand was still on her arm. The bad hand hung at his side, useless and shaking. His mouth opened a fraction and closed again. He did not let her go, but the grip slackened, by degrees, as though the muscles had forgotten the order to remain hard. "Worse," he said at last. It was not a question. "My father was a blacksmith in Bristol. I have seen worse." She did not move her palm. "The soup, Your Grace." He stepped back. It cost him. She saw it cost him. He turned his face away from the corridor light by old habit and walked to the chair beside the cold fire, and he sat. He sat the way a man sits who has not been allowed to sit in front of another person for a very long time, with the back too straight and the bad hand hidden in the fold of the robe. She brought the tray. She set it on the small table at his knee. She lifted the silver cover. The soup was still warm beneath it. She had carried it up under a wool cloth for that very reason. A simple broth with leeks and a little barley, and a slice of yesterday's bread cut thin enough to sop. "Spoon in the right hand or the left, Your Grace?" "The left," he said it without looking at her. She put the spoon in his left hand. She did not touch the scarred fingers. She stepped back to the window and pretended to be busy with the latch. He ate. The first spoonful went down slowly, as if the throat had to remember the shape of swallowing. The second came faster. By the fourth, he had stopped trying to hide the bad hand and had set it on the edge of the tray for balance. He did not look at her. He looked at the bowl. He ate the broth and then the barley at the bottom, and then he tore the bread with his teeth because the right hand would not hold it against the left, and he ate that too. When the bowl was empty, he set the spoon down with a small, precise click and put his face in his good hand and did not move for a long time. Sophia watched the curtain breathe at the open window. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "the south sash. The day after, the long one above the desk. By the end of the week, the room will have forgotten what it was. And in return? In return, you will eat what is brought, Your Grace. That is the whole of it." He lowered the hand. The gray eyes were wet but did not spill. They looked at the place where her voice was, very near now, and almost at her. "Your name?" "Sophia Whitmore." "Whitmore." He turned the word as if testing the weight of a coin. 9 days, Mrs. Hollings said. 9 days, Your Grace. And in 9 days you have done what 12 physicians and 1 bishop could not. I have opened a window. A sound came out of him that was almost a laugh and almost not. It was rusted at the hinges. He let it die and reached for the cup of small beer she had set beside the bowl and drank it in one long pull. Below stairs, Somewhere far beneath the floorboards, the front bell was rung. Sophia heard it. She did not move. The Duke heard it also, and his shoulders climbed by a fraction of an inch, and the bad hand curled into the robe. "She is here," he said. "She is in the hall. You will not tell her." "I will not tell her anything, Your Grace. She will ask. She will ask Mrs. Hollings. She will ask the boot boy. Mrs. Hollings has wept at the foot of these stairs every morning for 2 years. She will say only that you are unwell." He turned his face toward the window. The corridor light caught the scar, and he did not flinch from it this time. "Go down," he said. "Receive her. Watch her. Tell me at supper what she has touched and what she has asked. Touch nothing she gives you. Take nothing she offers." Sophia paused, half a breath. "Your Grace? Do you understand me? I understand you very well." She gathered the tray. At the door she paused with the wood under her palm and looked back. He had not moved from the chair. He sat in his own dim room with the cold light on the worst side of his face and his eyes closed, and for the first time since she had crossed the threshold of Ashfern Hall, he looked like a man, and not like a story the servants told below stairs at night. She closed the door without sound and went down. The great hall smelled of cold lavender and a perfume she did not know. Lady Caroline Fairfax stood at the foot of the grand staircase in Wedgwood blue silk, the cream kid gloves still on, the cashmere shawl folded over one arm, the cameo at her throat catching the weak morning light. She turned when she heard footsteps. The ice-blue eyes traveled from Sophia's cap to her boots and back, slowly, and the small, disdainful mouth did not change. "New." "Yes, my lady." "Name." "Sophia Whitmore, my lady." "And what is the new Sophia Whitmore doing on the east stair before noon?" "Carrying down the breakfast tray, my lady." The eyes flicked to the tray, to the empty bowl, to the spoon, to the bread crust that was not there. A small thing moved behind the eyes. It was not anger. It was something colder than anger, and quicker. It came and went in less than a breath, and the disdainful mouth shaped itself into a polite curve. "How charming," Lady Caroline said. "The cousin eats again. Mrs. Hollings, do show me to the morning room. I shall take chocolate while I wait." Mrs. Hollings came forward from the shadow under the stair with her trembling hand pressed flat to the black bombazine of her dress. The pale blue eyes flicked from Sophia to the tray to Caroline and held there. "The morning room, my lady." "At once." Caroline moved past Sophia without a glance. The hem of the blue silk passed within an inch of Sophia's boot. At the door of the morning room, she paused and spoke over her shoulder, lightly, as if to the air. "Whitmore, bring up the chocolate yourself." "Yes, my lady." The door closed. Mrs. Hollings caught Sophia's elbow at the foot of the stair. The trembling hand was very strong. Child, what have you done?" "I have opened a window." "You have opened a tomb." The pale eyes were wet, and she will smell it before noon. "Then we shall give her something else to smell." Sophia set the tray on the side table. "The chocolate, Mrs. Hollings, and a sprig of rosemary in the pot, if there is one. Old country trick. It steadies the nerves of the visitor and dulls the nose." Mrs. Hollings stared. Then, slowly, the wrinkled face softened into something almost a smile. "Where did you learn that, girl?" "My mother." "Your mother was a wise woman." "My mother is a wise woman, Mrs. Hollings. She still draws breath in Bristol, and I mean to keep her in bread until she stops." She carried the chocolate up herself. Lady Caroline took the cup without thanks and held it under her nose for a long moment, and her small mouth twitched once. She set the cup down untasted. "The rosemary is a country touch." "The cook's notion, my lady." "The cook has not put rosemary in my chocolate in 7 years." The ice-blue eyes settled on Sophia and stayed. "What did my cousin eat this morning, Whitmore?" "Broth, my lady." "Barley?" "A little bread." "And the day before?" "The same, my lady." "And who carried up the tray?" "I did, my lady." "Alone." "Alone, my lady." Caroline lifted the cup again, and this time she drank. Over the rim, her eyes did not leave Sophia's face. When she set it down, the porcelain rang once, very small, against the saucer. "How fortunate the house is," she said, "to have found such a willing girl. Tell me, Whitmore, do you read?" "Yes, my lady." "And write?" "Yes, my lady." "How unusual." The cup turned a quarter inch under her finger. "I shall remember it. You may go." Sophia curtsied. The curtsy was correct and lasted no longer than it should have. At the door she heard the cup turn again on the saucer, and she did not look back. In the corridor she stopped and pressed her shoulder blades to the cold paneling, and took one long breath and let it out slowly through her nose. The hand at her side was steady. She willed it to remain so. She climbed back to the east wing by the servant's stair. He was at the window. He was on his feet at the open sash with his good hand braced on the frame, and his face turned into the cold air, and the corridor light fell on the burned side, and he did not turn away from it when she came in. She drank the chocolate, Sophia said, with rosemary. You heard? This house carries sound through the chimneys. I have learned its language. He did not move from the window. She asked if you read. Yes. She does not ask servants if they read, not unless she means to use them or be rid of them. I gathered as much. And yet you went down. You asked me to. He was quiet a long moment. From this day, he said at last, the tray comes by your hand only. The keys to this corridor stay on your ring, not on Mrs. Hollings's. You will sleep in the small room at the head of the back stair, and every evening after supper, you will come here and tell me what you have seen in the house, room by room, and what she has touched, and what she has asked, and from whom. Your Grace, I am a housemaid. As of this morning, you are the chambermaid of the Duke of Ashfern. The wages double. Send what you must to Bristol. The rest I shall keep in a strong box in this room, in your name, against the day you choose to leave my service. I have not asked for any of this. That is why I am giving it. She stood very still in the door. The candlestick she had left on the writing table caught a thin edge of light. Outside, a rook called once across the park and was answered. And the windows, your Grace? Open them, he said. Open every window in this wing. Tear down every board. Burn the green robe. I am tired of the smell of wine. He turned then, fully, into the cold morning light, and he looked at her with the steel-gray eyes that did not quite find her, and the silver scar held the light without shame. Sophia Whitmore, your Grace. Eat what is brought, he said quietly. That was the bargain. I shall keep my half. She bowed her head. When she lifted it, the corner of her mouth had moved by a hair, and she did not try to hide it. She gathered the tray and went down to begin her new accounts. Below, in the morning room, Lady Caroline Fairfax sat with the empty chocolate cup turned in her gloved hand and stared at the door through which the new girl had gone, and her small mouth shaped a single word too quietly for any servant to hear. In the weeks that followed, the east wing changed by inches. The boards came down one by one and were stacked by the kitchen door for kindling. The green robe went into the wash and did not come back. A barber was sent for from York and shaved the 3-week stubble from the unburned side of the jaw. The Duke ate broth, then eggs, then mutton. He walked the length of the long gallery with his good hand on Sophia's shoulder and learned the count of his own paces. He did not yet leave the east wing. He did not yet meet Mrs. Hollings's eye, but he ate. And every evening, by the small fire in the dressing-room at the end of the corridor, Sophia stood with her hands folded at her apron and told him the house. She told him which doors Caroline had opened. She told him which ledgers she had asked to see. She told him the name of the steward who carried a portfolio everywhere under his arm, and whose right index finger was always stained with fresh ink, though he claimed to have written nothing that day. Wren, the Duke said. He did not look up from the fire. Silas Wren, my father's man before he was mine. He has been 3 times this week to the morning room when her ladyship was within. Has he indeed? Twice with the portfolio, once without. And the portfolio? Locked, your Grace, with a small brass clasp shaped like a fox. The Duke went very still in his chair. My father had 2 such clasps made, he said. One for the family ledger, the other for the household ledger of Ashfern. He lifted the steel-gray eyes from the fire and turned them toward the place where her voice was. I have the family ledger here, in this room, in the drawer of that desk. Mr. Wren should not have a fox clasp on any portfolio in this house. Sophia did not answer at once. She was watching the firelight move across the scarred side of his face and counting, very quietly, the days since she had first carried a cold tray up the east stair. 9 and 21 more made 30. 30 days, and a man had stood up from a chair. Your Grace, she said, I think tomorrow I shall ask Mrs. Hollings if she can spare me an hour in the steward's office, to dust. To dust. There is a great deal of dust, Your Grace, in the rooms no one watches. The Duke smiled. It was the first time, the unburned corner of his mouth lifted by a small, clean degree, and the scarred corner followed it as far as it could, and he turned his face fully into the firelight, as if he had decided to stop hiding from it in his own house. Dust, then, Mrs. Whitmore, he said. By all means, dust. She curtsied and went out, and the small brass key to the east wing turned on the ring at her waist, and somewhere 2 floors below, in the steward's narrow office under the back stair, Mr. Silas Wren bent over a ledger by candlelight and noted, in his neat ink-stained hand, a sum of £370 disbursed that quarter to a name he had been very careful never to write in full. 3 weeks after that rainy night, the household had learned the new shape of the days, though no one named it aloud. The east wing curtains opened at 9:30. A tray went up at 10 and came down at noon, nearly empty. The Duke had not yet been seen on the gallery, but the floorboards above the library now creaked in the slow pattern of a man pacing, and Mrs. Hollings, hearing it for the first time in 2 years, had sat down on the lowest step of the back stair and pressed her white lace cap to her eyes until the trembling in her right hand subsided. Sophia carried this knowledge in her apron pocket the way another woman might have carried a coin, quietly, without showing it and without spending it. On the morning that everything turned, she was sent to the steward's office to fetch the linen account. Mrs. Hollings had given the order in the still room over a basin of dried lavender. Mr. Wren keeps the household ledgers under the back stair. Tell him I require the linen book for the quarter. He is not to put you off. The housekeeper's iron keyring trembled at her waist as she said it. He has put me off 4 times this month. Sophia tied a fresh apron and went. The steward's office was a narrow room wedged between the wine cellar and the privy, lit by one grated window onto the kitchen yard. A black hen pecked at frost beyond the glass. Sophia knocked twice. No answer came. She turned the handle and stepped in. The room smelled of old ink and stale tobacco. A high writing desk stood under the window. Pigeonholes climbed the wall behind it, stuffed with rolled papers and faded red tape. Mr. Wren was not at his desk. His tobacco-brown tailcoat hung on a peg by the door, the elbows shiny with wear. Sophia stood still and listened. She heard nothing inside. She crossed to the desk. The linen book was not on top. A great calf-bound estate ledger lay open instead, its pages weighted by a pewter inkstand and a folded pair of round spectacles she had never seen Mr. Wren without. He had been called away in a hurry. Then, the ink in the well had not crusted. She lifted the inkstand carefully and slid the open ledger toward the light. She had no intention, in that first moment, of reading more than the heading of the page. She wanted only to learn where the linen accounts were kept, so she could carry the book to Mrs. Hollings and be gone. But the writing on the open page was not linen. It was rents. The neat ink-stained hand had set out, in 3 columns, the names of the Ashfern tenants, the sums received that quarter, and a 4th column under the heading Disbursements, that ran down the page in a long, patient ribbon of numbers. Sophia read slowly. She had been taught her letters and her sums by a Bristol curate's wife who had believed, against most of her neighbors, that a black girl ought to keep her own accounts. She had kept them ever since. She knew what a balanced page looked like. This page was not balanced. Against the rents received, a sum that climbed near £3,000 for the quarter, for Ashfern held good land, there stood, under disbursements, a string of entries to the usual mouths: roof slates, the smith at Ashfern village, oats, the apothecary, the wages of the indoor staff. These she could match. And then, near the foot, set apart by a faint rule the steward had drawn with his own pen, came a line in slightly smaller writing. To LCF, per private arrangement of the late Duke's executor, £370. She did not understand the initials at first. She read the line a second time, and a third, and on the third reading her hand grew quite still on the desk. She turned back 1 page. The same entry stood there for the previous quarter, in the same neat hand, for the same sum. She turned back another. There it was again, quarter after quarter, going back through the leaves like a slow tide, the same 3 letters, the same £370, leaving the estate of a man who had not signed a paper in 2 years. Sophia did not yet know who LCF was, but she knew, with the clean, cold certainty she had learned at her mother's washtub, that a steward who hides a recurring sum behind initials is not paying a tradesman. A board creaked in the passage. She closed the ledger as gently as she had opened it, set the inkstand back upon its place, and turned, smoothing her apron, just as Mr. Silas Wren stepped through the door with a tin candle-box under his arm. He stopped when he saw her. His watery brown eyes went first to her face, then to the desk, then to the ledger, then back to her face. The ink stain on his right index finger looked very dark. "You have a reason to be here, girl. Mrs. Hollings sent me for the linen account, sir." Sophia curtsied without lowering her eyes. "I knocked. The door was unlatched." He set the candle-box down with a small, careful click. "The linen account is in the still-room press, where it has always been. Mrs. Hollings knows this." "I shall tell her so, sir." "Do." He stepped aside from the door, but only by a hand's breadth, so that she had to pass close to him. His coat smelled of cold pipe smoke. As she went by, he said, in a voice so flat it might have been a comment on the weather, "It would be a pity, Whitmore, if a new girl were to mistake curiosity for duty. New girls are easily let go." "Yes, sir." She did not run in the passage. She walked at the pace of a maid sent on an errand, and she did not stop walking until she had reached the kitchen yard, and the yard was bright, and the black hen was still there pecking at the frost, and her hands at last were allowed to shake. She did not go to Mrs. Hollings. She went, instead, by the back stair and the gallery and the long corridor with its sheeted portraits, to the east wing. Julian was at the window. This in itself was a wonder she had not yet grown used to. For 3 weeks he had moved, by inches, out of the bed and the wing-back chair, and now stood, more days than not, with one shoulder against the casement, looking down at the avenue of leafless limes. The wine-stained, moss-green velvet robe had been washed. The 3-week stubble had become a clean, short beard. The steel-gray eyes still did not seek hers when she came in, but they no longer flinched from the light. He heard her step and spoke without turning. "You are early." "I am, Your Grace." "And out of breath." "A little." He turned then. The silver-ridged scar caught the window light along its whole long ridge from temple to jaw, and she did not look away, and he did not lift his hand to cover it. They had passed that bridge in the first week. He studied her face the way he had begun to study most things in this room, slowly, as if relearning their use. "What has happened?" She did not answer at once. She crossed to the small writing table, where his untouched correspondence lay in 2 yellowed piles, lifted the empty water jug, set it down again. Then she said quietly, "Your Grace, who is LCF?" The stillness that came into him was not the stillness of a man surprised. It was older than that. It was the stillness of a man who has heard a name he had laid down 2 years ago and finds it has been walking the house in his absence. "Where did you hear those letters?" "In Mr. Wren's ledger, £370 a quarter, for longer than I have been alive in this house." He was silent for the space of 3 breaths. Then he said, "Lady Caroline Fairfax, my cousin." He turned back to the window. "My nearest living kin by my mother's side, the heiress presumptive of Ashburn, should I die without issue or—" and here a small, precise smile touched the unburnt corner of his mouth. "Should I be declared otherwise unfit? She lives near, Your Grace, in London for the season, at Fairfax Place, in Berkeley Square, the rest of the year. She has not crossed my threshold since the funeral." He paused. "She wrote, in the first months, very prettily, offering comfort, offering to take the management of the estate into her own hands until I should be recovered. I did not answer." "And the money, Your Grace?" "I did not authorize it." The words were very quiet. He spoke them to the glass, not to her. Sophia folded her hands in front of her apron. "Then Mr. Wren is paying her, sir, out of your rents, without your knowledge. Quarter on quarter." He did not move. "You will go," he said, after a moment, "to my desk in the library. You will find a small brass key in the second drawer on the left, beneath a folded silk cravat. You will take it down the south corridor to the muniment room. You will lock the door behind you. You will bring me the bundle of papers tied in green tape that lies on the second shelf, marked Fairfax. You will speak to no one of this. Not Mrs. Hollings, not the boy on the gravel. Yes, Your Grace. And Whitmore." "Sir." Do not pass the steward's office on your way." She went. The muniment room was cold and full of dust and the smell of old wax. The Fairfax bundle was thicker than she had expected. She carried it back inside her apron, against her stays, and laid it on the desk by the window without a word. He untied the green tape with the 2 good fingers of his right hand and the steady fingers of his left, and he read for a long time in silence, while she stood at the door and watched the avenue of limes for any rider who should not be there. When at last he looked up, his face had changed. "Send to the village," he said. "Tell the postboy I require Mr. Elias Thorne of Lincoln's Inn at Ashfern Hall by the first coach he can take. He is to come alone. He is to bring the chancery files for the parish of Ashfern for the present Michaelmas term. Tell him the matter is urgent and is to be discussed under seal. Write it in my hand if you can. I shall sign." "I can write a fair hand, your grace." He looked at her then, properly, for the first time that morning. "Of course you can." Mr. Elias Thorne arrived on the second day, in the dusk, with a damp, brown leather portfolio under his arm and the road mud of 3 counties on his polished black ankle boots. He was a short man, thin, with a bald crown and gray at the temples, and round silver-rimmed spectacles that he wiped twice on his white cravat before he would consent to sit down. He had been the late Duke's man for 30 years. He had not been admitted to the East Wing since the funeral. Julian received him in the library. The fire had been lit. Sophia stood at the sideboard with the tea and was not dismissed. Thorne laid his portfolio on the long oak table and opened it with the slow gravity of a man unwrapping a wound. He set out 3 documents, side by side, and turned them so that the Duke could read. "Your Grace will forgive me," he said, "for what I am about to place before you. I had hoped never to do so." The first paper was a petition, drawn in the formal hand of a London proctor, addressed to the Lord High Chancellor of Great Britain. The second was a sworn affidavit. The third was a fee note in the same proctor's hand, marked paid. Julian read the petition through twice. Then he read the affidavit. Then he sat back in the wing chair and laid his scarred right hand very gently upon the arm. "Read it aloud, Thorne, the relevant parts. The maid shall hear it. She has earned it." Thorne glanced once at Sophia, hesitated, and obeyed. He had a dry, careful voice, the voice of a man who had spent his life pronouncing other men's ruin without raising it. "That the said Julian Hastings Blackwell, Duke of Ashfern, by reason of the grievous injuries sustained in the fire at Ashfern Hall in the year of our Lord 1824, and by reason of the melancholy and seclusion consequent thereupon, hath been for upwards of 2 years past, and now is, of unsound mind, and incapable of managing his own person, his estate, and his affairs, and the petitioner, being his nearest of kin and presumptive heir, doth humbly pray that a commission de lunatico inquirendo may issue, and that, upon the finding of the jury, the care of his person and the management of his estate be committed to the petitioner, Lady Caroline Fairfax, spinster, of Berkeley Square, in the county of Middlesex. The fire spat once. No one spoke. Thorne cleared his throat. The petition is supported, Your Grace, by 2 affidavits. The first is from Dr. Mortimer Briggs, of Harley Street. The second is from Dr. Theophilus Crane, of the Marylebone Asylum. Both swear that they have observed Your Grace, at a distance, on more than one occasion during the past 12-month, and that in their professional opinion you are deranged in your faculties, unable to recognize familiar persons, and a danger, if not to others, then unquestionably to yourself. I have never met either gentleman. No, Your Grace, nor would they swear that you had. They swear only that they have observed. The window of the east wing, I gather, has been considered observation enough. Julian's mouth made the small, precise smile again, and this time it did not reach the unburnt corner. It stayed in the center, like a cut. And the fee, Thorne, who paid the proctor? The fee note, Your Grace, is drawn against the private account of Lady Caroline Fairfax at Coots, but the funds entered upon that account in the same week were transferred from a country bank in York. The Yorkshire transfer is signed, on the face of the bill, with the initials S.W. Silas Wren. So I read it, Your Grace. He has been paying her my rents to buy 2 physicians to swear me mad, so that she may be granted my person and my lands. In substance, Your Grace, yes. And the petition is set down for hearing? The Michaelmas sittings of Chancery close in 3 weeks. The matter has been entered for the first day of Hilary term. In the new year, your grace, a jury of 12 men of the county shall be impaneled at York to view your person and pronounce upon your wits. Mr. Thorne paused and laid his thin hand flat upon the petition. If the jury find for the petitioner, the estate passes at once into the care of Lady Caroline, as committee of the lunatic. From that hour, your grace, you may not sign, you may not sell, you may not contract a marriage. You may be removed, by lawful order, to a place of safekeeping. Persons so removed, in my experience of these commissions, do not commonly live above the year. The fire spat again. Sophia did not move from the sideboard. She had set the teapot down some time ago. Her hand was on the silver tray, and she could feel, through the metal, the faint tremor of the floor, as a horse went past on the gravel below. Julian closed his eyes. For a long moment, he was simply the man she had found 3 weeks ago in the dark, the man who had not eaten in days, who had let a cousin he had not seen since the funeral pay a steward to bleed his lands and buy his madness. Then he opened his eyes, and he was not that man any longer. Thorne, your grace, you will lodge nothing yet. You will return to London by the morning coach. You will write to no one of this conversation. You will, however, instruct a clerk of your choosing to make, in his own hand, a fair copy of every entry in the Ashfern estate ledgers for the last 5 years, beginning with the rents and ending with the disbursements. The copy is to be sworn before a commissioner. The originals are to remain where they are. Mr. Wren is not to know. It shall be done, your grace. And, Thorne, your grace, you will also obtain for me, by whatever means your discretion suggests, the names of every creditor to whom Lady Caroline Fairfax stands at present indebted. The trade, the gaming, the milliner, everything. I wish to know what she owes, and to whom, before the new year. Mr. Thorne's round spectacles caught the firelight. He inclined his head very slightly, and in that small movement Sophia saw, for the first time, the steel that had kept a quiet country solicitor in the service of 3 Dukes of Ashfern. I had hoped, your grace, that you might one day ask me that question. He gathered his papers, tied them in the brown tape, and went out. Julian sat a long while in the wing chair. The fire burned down. Sophia did not speak. At last he said, without turning, "She means to have me declared a lunatic, Sophia, before 12th night." It was the first time he had used her given name. She set it aside, carefully, to consider later. "Yes, your grace. And the man under my own roof has been her hand." "Yes, your grace. You will go on as you have done. The curtains at 9:30, the tray at 10. You will say nothing to Mrs. Hollings, nothing to the boys in the stable. You will pass Mr. Wren in the passage, and you will curtsy, and you will smile if you can. He must not know that we know, not for one day. Do you understand me?" "I understand you, your grace." He turned his head then, only a little, so that the firelight ran along the silver ridge of the scar. "And, Sophia, the window in this room, tomorrow morning you will open it again." She curtsied, and she went. In the steward's narrow office under the back stair, that same night, by the same candle, Mr. Silas Wren bent over the same ledger and entered, in his neat ink-stained hand, the sum of £370 disbursed that quarter to the same name he had been very careful never to write in full. And 2 floors above him, in a library where the fire had gone to red ash, the Duke of Ashfern sat awake at his desk, and for the first time in 2 years he sharpened a quill. By the 5th week, the rain came down on Ashfern Hall the way it had come on the night Sophia first arrived, only colder, with the particular weight of November settling into the slates. She crossed the kitchen garden at 9:30 with a basket of forced quince on her hip, the hem of her charcoal grey wool already heavy with mud, and she did not yet know that a carriage she had no reason to expect had turned in at the south gate. In the east wing, Julian Hastings Blackwell had been awake since dawn. He had bathed, he had let Mrs. Hollings shave the 3 weeks of stubble from the unburnt side of his jaw. He sat now in his father's old library coat, the dark green wool too loose at the shoulder, a clean cravat knotted badly because his 3 stiff fingers refused the knot. He kept tugging at it. The gold signet ring on his left little finger caught the firelight. A polite cough at the door. Mr. Thorne, brown portfolio under the arm. "Your Grace, the carriage at the South Drive is Lady Caroline's." Julian's hand paused on the cravat. She was not invited. No, your grace. And yet she comes. As she has come every November for 2 years, your grace. The difference is that this November, you are seated in the library. Julian looked at the fire. The light moved over the silver ridge of scar from temple to jaw. Let her in. Have Mrs. Hollings bring tea to the blue drawing room. Send the new maid as well. Sophia, your grace? Sophia? Thorn hesitated only a moment. He had seen the entry in Wren's ledger. He had read the petition to Chancery. He knew, as a solicitor knows weather, that Lady Caroline did not travel 40 miles in cold rain without a parcel hidden in her muff. But he bowed, and he went. In the blue drawing room, the curtains had been drawn back for the first time in 2 years. Pale gray light fell on the Aubusson rug, on the porcelain shepherdess on the mantel, on the silver tea service Mrs. Hollings had polished till her wrist trembled. Sophia entered with the tray. She set it down. She took her place by the door, hands folded over the white linen apron, the black ribbon at her left wrist visible against the cream cuff. Lady Caroline Fairfax came in on a draught of cold air and wet violet perfume. The Wedgwood blue silk of her traveling gown was unspotted. The long cream gloves were unsoiled. She had walked from the carriage to the door without setting her slippers on a single puddle. That alone, Sophia thought, was a kind of warning. Cousin. Caroline's voice was a silver bell rung once. How well you look. How wonderfully you look. I scarcely knew you. Julian rose. He bowed the eighth of an inch his rank permitted. Caroline, may I sit? You may. She arranged herself on the rose silk settee, the white cashmere shawl falling in a deliberate sweep across her knees. The garnet ring caught the light. Her ice-blue eyes traveled the room and rested, for the briefest measured fraction of a second, on Sophia by the door. Then they returned to Julian as if Sophia were a clock or a vase. You have rejoined the world, Julian. I am moved beyond expression. I came merely to leave my card as I do every year, and I am rewarded by the sight of you out of that dreadful room. It was not so dreadful. It was a tomb, my dear. We all said so. Henry said so. Even the servants said so. My servants do not discuss me. No. A smile. Of course not. Sophia poured the stream of tea into the porcelain made a thin, steady sound. Caroline accepted her cup without looking at the hand that gave it. And who, she said lightly, is this remarkable creature who has worked the miracle? I do not recognize her. She is Whitmore, Mrs. Hollings said from the doorway, before Julian or Sophia could speak. Sophia Whitmore. She came at Michaelmas. Whitmore. From where? Whitmore. Bristol, my lady, said Sophia. Bristol. Caroline tasted the word as if it had been left too long in the larder. How interesting. And your mother? Your father? My mother lives, my lady, my father does not. How sad. And what brought you so far north? £3 a year and a bed, my lady. Caroline laughed, a small bright laugh that contained no warmth. Forthright. I like her, Julian. I like her exceedingly. Do keep her. I intend to. Something in the way he said it made Caroline's gloved hand close a fraction tighter on the cup. She set the cup down. She drew off the right glove with great delicacy, finger by finger, and laid it across her lap. Cousin, she said, I have something difficult to say. Then say it. In the carriage, on the road from the inn, I missed a thing, a small thing, a silver caddy spoon. Aunt Helena's, you remember, the one with the fox engraved on the bowl. I had it in my reticule when I came in. I had it on my lap as I removed my pelisse in the hall. She paused. Her eyes did not move to Sophia. They held Julian. I do not accuse anyone. I should be desolate to accuse anyone. But the spoon is gone. The fire spat once. Sophia did not move. Caroline. Julian's voice had cooled by several degrees. You will not have lost a spoon between the hall and this room. I should not have thought so either. Then it is in your reticule still. Search it, by all means. She held out the small beaded bag. I beg you, search it. Mr. Thorne, who had been standing at the window like a piece of furniture pretending to be a man, took the reticule. He opened it. He turned it inside out upon the tea table. A handkerchief, a vinaigrette, a folded card, 2 shillings. No spoon. You see, said Caroline softly. I see, said Julian, that a spoon is missing. I do not see what follows. What follows, dear cousin, is that there are 5 persons in this room, and 4 of us have been searched by birth." The silence that fell was the silence of cold water poured into a deep well. Sophia felt the heat rise from her collar to her hairline and stop there, neither blush nor shame, only the body recognizing danger before the mind had named it. Her hands stayed folded. "You will not," said Julian, "search my maid in my drawing room. I would not dream of it, Julian. I ask only that Mrs. Hollings take her aside, quietly, as one does. If nothing is found, I shall be ashamed, and I shall apologize upon my knees." "There is nothing to find," said Sophia. It was the first time she had spoken without being asked. The very firm, dark brown eyes did not lower. Caroline's gaze met them, and for a heartbeat the small, disdainful mouth tightened in something that was not anger and not fear but recognition. The recognition of one player meeting another at a table where the stakes had just been raised. "Then there is nothing to fear," Caroline said. Julian looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at Julian. He did not, in that moment, know what to do with a world in which his cousin asked a thing in his own house, in the daylight, in front of his solicitor, with the precise courtesy that made refusal an insult to a lady and acceptance an insult to a maid. "Mrs. Hollings," he said at last, low, in the small parlor. "You and you alone." "Your Grace," said Thorne. "You alone, Mrs. Hollings." The old woman's pale blue eyes had gone red again. Her trembling right hand reached for Sophia's elbow with the gentleness one uses on a wounded bird. "Come, child." Sophia went. She walked the length of the rug at the pace of any maid who has been told to step into another room. She did not look at Caroline. She did not look at Julian. The black ribbon at her wrist moved once against the cream cuff and was still. In the small parlor, Mrs. Hollings closed the door. Her lips were pressed white. "Sophia, forgive me. Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive, Mrs. Hollings. Do it." The old housekeeper's hands shook so that she could scarcely untie the apron strings. She felt the apron pocket. Empty. She felt the deep pocket beneath the dress, the one every maid carried for thimble and needle. Her fingers closed on something cold. Her face went the color of old wax. She drew out a silver caddy spoon, the fox engraved cleanly upon the bowl, and wrapped about the handle, tied in a neat double bow, was a length of black ribbon, soft, narrow, frayed at one end where a younger thumb had worried it for years. Sophia's mother had given her that ribbon at the dock at Bristol. There was only one such ribbon in the house. Sophia wore the other at her left wrist. For one breath, Mrs. Hollings could not speak. Then she did the bravest thing of her 60 years, and turned the spoon over in her palm as if she had never seen it before, and said, "Child, child, run." "No," said Sophia. "They will send you to Botany Bay. They have hanged maids for less. If I run, I confess. I will not confess to what I have not done." "Sophia, open the door, Mrs. Hollings." The door opened. Mrs. Hollings walked back into the blue drawing room with the spoon in her open palm and the ribbon trailing from her fingers like a small black tongue, and the sound she made was not a word but a small broken note, and Lady Caroline Fairfax pressed one gloved hand to her mouth in a gesture of perfect, rehearsed grief. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh no." Julian rose so fast his chair struck the wainscot. "That is not possible." "Your Grace," Thorne said quietly, "I am required by law." "I know what you are required by, Thorne. Hold your tongue." He crossed to Sophia. He stopped a pace from her. The steel-gray eyes searched her face for the lie he needed to find there, and did not find it. He saw instead the very firm, dark brown eyes that had not lowered for him in his own bedchamber, and did not lower now. "Sophia, tell me you did not." "I did not, Your Grace." "On what?" "On my mother." He turned. The burnt half of his face caught the gray light from the window, silver and terrible. "Caroline, out of my house." "Julian, the spoon." "Out of my house." "My dear cousin." Caroline's voice was honeyed, sorrowful, and clear enough to reach Thorne and Mrs. Hollings and the footman now in the doorway. I beg you, you cannot shield a thief because she has been kind to you. The magistrate must be called. If you do not call him, I shall, and the county shall know that the Duke of Ashfern harbors felons because he has lost the use of his judgment. They will say what they have already begun to say. A pause, precisely measured. They will say it in chancery. The word fell into the room like a coin onto marble. Julian went very still. Thorn's hand tightened on the portfolio. Sophia, who did not yet know what chancery meant in this house, knew only that Julian's face had gone the color of the ash in the grate, and that his 3 stiff fingers had closed into a fist that could not quite close. "Send for the magistrate," he said. "Your Grace," Thorn began. "Send for him. Mr. Crail, from Ripon, not the village man, tonight. It will be Mr. Bell from the village before Mr. Crail can be reached, Your Grace. The roads, then Mr. Bell." Julian did not look at Sophia. He could not. "Until Mr. Crail arrives, she is held under this roof, not in the cellar, in Mrs. Holling's room. Mrs. Hollings answers for her." "Julian," said Caroline, softly scandalized. The law, Caroline, is in this house mine, until the magistrate arrives. Go." She rose. She drew on the cream glove with the same delicacy she had drawn it off. At the door she turned and let her ice-blue eyes rest at last, fully, openly, upon Sophia, and the small disdainful mouth shaped itself into a smile that was meant for one viewer only. "Goodbye, Whitmore." The door closed. The carriage wheels turned on the wet gravel and were gone. Mr. Bell of the village arrived within the hour, wet through, apologetic, frightened of the house and of the Duke, and of the Duke's cousin in equal measure. He saw the spoon, he saw the ribbon. He noted, with a clerk's small dreadful pencil, that the prisoner had been found in possession of stolen plate to the value above 1 shilling, and was therefore liable, under the late statute, to transportation beyond the seas for a term of 7 years. "She is not to be taken from this house tonight," said Julian. "Your Grace, the procedure. She sleeps in the housekeeper's chamber. You may post your constable in the corridor. In the morning Mr. Crail of Ripon will hear the matter. Until then she is in my keeping. Your Grace, with respect, the woman who lays the charge, lays it before a magistrate of standing, Bell, not before a village clerk, in the morning." Mr. Bell, who had 3 daughters and a cottage on Ashfern land, bowed very low and accepted the morning. That night Julian did not go to his library. He went instead to the small parlor where Mrs. Hollings sat with Sophia, the door open by his order, a single candle on the table between them. The constable stood at the corridor's end and did not hear. Julian sat opposite Sophia. He set his 3-fingered hand on the table, palm up, the way a man lays down a card he no longer wishes to hide. "Sophia, why your ribbon?" "Because she saw it, Your Grace. Last Lady Day. I curtsied. She looked at my wrist. I thought it was nothing. It was not nothing." "No, Your Grace. Why does she want you gone?" The very firm, dark brown eyes met his. "Because I opened the curtains." He was silent a long time. The candle thinned the silver scar to a single fine line. "In the morning," he said, "Crail will come. He is an honest man. I will speak for you. Thorn will speak for you. Mrs. Hollings will speak for you. Your Grace." "What?" "3 of you will speak. She will bring the rector. She will bring Wren. She will bring 2 physicians who have already signed a paper saying that you are not in your right mind." Julian's head came up. "How do you know of the physicians?" "Mr. Thorn told me yesterday in the still room. He thought I should know what house I served." "And you stayed." "I stayed." He looked at her then, as he had looked at her on the morning she had put her palm on the worst of the scar, and he found he could not speak. He rose. At the door he stopped. "You will not go to Botany Bay, Sophia, on my mother's grave. Sit and eat something, Your Grace, before you swear on graves." He almost smiled. He went out. The rain held all night. At 4 in the morning the wind changed, and at 5 a different carriage came up the South Drive at a speed no honest carriage keeps in the dark on a rutted road. Mr. Bell's constable, dozing in the corridor, heard the door of the housekeeper's chamber open and Mrs. Hollings's small cry, and ran. In the courtyard 4 men in oilskins stood about a closed conveyance with no crest. A 5th, in a damp tobacco-brown tailcoat, held a paper out of the wet under his portfolio. Mr. Silas Wren's watery brown eyes would not settle. The paper bore a magistrate's seal that was not Mr. Crail's and not Mr. Bell's, but the seal of a justice from Leeds, whose debts to Lady Caroline Fairfax were the kind that men pay with signatures in the dark. "Order of immediate committal," Wren said, "by post-chaise to Wakefield, thence to the hulks at Sheerness. The Duke is not to be disturbed. He is, by separate writ, not at this present hour competent to intervene. Mrs. Hollings flung herself at the carriage door. A constable set her aside as gently as he would set aside a child. Sophia walked into the rain in the charcoal gray wool with no cloak, the white cap gone, the 4B coils coming loose at her temple, and the black ribbon still at her left wrist. She did not weep. She turned once and looked up at the east wing. A single window stood open on the second floor, the curtain moving white in the wet wind. Behind that curtain, in a library where the fire had again gone to red ash, the Duke of Ashfern slept the heavy, drugged sleep of a man whose evening brandy had been poured by a steward who had served the house for 9 years and had, that night, served something else into the glass besides brandy. The carriage door closed. The wheels turned again. They carried Sophia Whitmore down the South Drive, past the gatehouse, past the milestone at 3, past the milestone at 4, into the grey country between Ashfern and Wakefield, where the rain ran sideways across the moor, and no horseman from the hall could yet have known to follow. And in the small parlor where the candle had burnt itself out, on the table where the Duke had laid his 3-fingered hand palm up, there remained only a length of black ribbon, frayed at one end, that Mrs. Hollings had not had the heart to take from the spoon, and that no one in Ashfern Hall now living knew belonged to a mother in Bristol who was, at that hour, beginning her day at a wash-tub and humming, without knowing why, the old air she had once hummed at the dock. Lord Henry Ashcroft did not knock. He shouldered the great oak door of the east wing open with the flat of his boot, and the iron latch struck the paneling with a crack that traveled the length of the gallery. Under his arm he carried a leather portfolio bound in red cord, and inside the portfolio were 3 documents that would, before the hour was out, undo a woman. Julian stood at the cold hearth, the moss-green robe loose on his shoulders, the wine-stained sleeve pushed back from a forearm gone thin. He had not eaten since the rain. He had not drawn a curtain. The fire was grey ash. "Get out, Henry." "Sit down." "I said get out." Ashcroft set the portfolio on the small table where, a fortnight before, Sophia had placed a tureen of broth, and he untied the cord with the steady hands of a man who had been a soldier before he had been an earl. "I will sit down with you, Julian, and you will look at 3 things. After that, if you wish me to leave, I will leave, but you will look." Julian did not move. The steel-gray eye, the only eye that still trusted a fellow creature, narrowed. "3 months ago," Ashcroft said, "you wrote me a letter I did not answer because I did not know how. You told me a maid had opened a window. You sounded almost alive. Today I came because Thorne sent for me at 4 in the morning, and a man like Thorne does not send for a friend at 4 in the morning over a household matter." He laid the first document flat. It was the steward's ledger, bound in tobacco-brown calf, the corners rubbed pale. He turned it open to a page Sophia had marked, weeks before, by folding the corner with her thumbnail. "Read." Julian came to the table because the room was very quiet and a friend was waiting. He bent. The 3 stiff fingers of his right hand hovered above the column. Quarterly payments. Bristol Mercer. Bond Street Modiste. A jeweler in Burlington Arcade. And against each entry, in Wren's tidy clerkly hand, the same 3 initials. L.C.F. "Caroline," Julian said. The word came out without weight, as if the breath behind it had been used some time ago. £2,400 in 18 months. Drawn against Ashfern rents. Authorized, on every leaf, by the steward who has eaten at your table since you were a boy. Julian did not answer. Ashcroft laid the second document beside the first. A petition lodged with the Court of Chancery on the 12th of September. Affidavit of 2 physicians of Harley Street, neither of whom has crossed your threshold since your father's funeral, swearing that Julian Hastings Blackwell, 6th Duke of Ashfern, is non compos mentis, by reason of melancholic derangement following burn injury, and praying that the management of his person and estates be committed to his nearest competent kinswoman. Signed Caroline Fairfax. Witnessed Silas Wren. Hearing set, Hilary Term. The fire was ash. The room held its breath. "She wants me in a private asylum," Julian said, slowly, as if testing whether the words could be carried, "and the title in trust for the son she has not yet had. She wants you dead, Julian. The asylum is the road." Julian's 3-fingered hand closed on the edge of the table. The signet ring on the left little finger caught what light there was, and threw a small, exhausted gleam. "Where is the 3rd paper?" Ashcroft did not produce it at once. He looked at his friend across the table, and for a moment the easy face of the man who smiled at everything was not easy at all. "I have had this," he said, "since the spring. I did not show it to you because I did not believe a man could survive both his burns and what is in it. I was a coward, Julian. I am sorry." He drew it out. A single sheet, folded thrice, the wax broken long ago. The hand on it was a young woman's hand, looped and quick, slanted to the right. Julian knew the hand before he knew it. His sister Eleanor had written him from school in that hand for 9 years. "It was sent to me," Ashcroft said, "the morning of the fire. She wrote it from the writing desk in the green parlor while you were out at the stables. The boy who carried it to the inn drank his shilling and forgot. The landlord found it in a coat at Michaelmas and sent it on to my London address. I read it in May." Julian took the letter. The paper was soft from being carried. He stood under the unlit chandelier with the steel-gray eye moving line by line. "Dearest Harry, I write in some haste and some confusion. An hour ago I went down to the stables to see whether the gray mare had foaled, and as I came round the corner of the tack room, I saw Caroline, our Caroline, walking out of the lower hayloft with one of the carriage lamps in her hand. The lamp was broken at the chimney, and the wick was guttering, and she had it tipped. Harry, she had it tipped, and she did not see me. She went out by the orchard gate. I do not know what to think. She is to dine with us tonight. I shall say nothing until I have spoken to Julian. Tell me, dear Harry, am I a fool to be afraid? Yours, Eleanor." Julian read it twice. He read it a third time. Then he set the letter very gently on the table beside the ledger and the petition, and he placed the flat of his 3 stiff fingers upon it, as one places a hand upon a Bible. "She set the stables." Yes. She set the stables, and Eleanor went to find her, and Eleanor did not come out. Yes. And the beam that fell on Eleanor was the beam I went in under. Yes, Julian. Julian closed his eyes. The room, which had been a tomb for 2 years, became for one moment simply a room. A man stood in it. A friend stood in it. On the table were 3 pieces of paper, and on the floor outside the door, although he could not yet know it, a length of black ribbon waited on a spoon in another room, and a young woman waited in a cell, in York, under a charge of theft, and somewhere in Bristol, a mother at a washtub was humming an air she could not have named. When Julian opened his eyes, the change in them was not violent. It was geological. Something that had been buried under 2 winters had risen to the surface of his face and would not go back down. "Where is Sophia?" Ashcroft hesitated. "That is the other thing. Mrs. Hollings is below. She has been weeping in the kitchen passage since first light, and she will not say why to anyone but you." Julian was already at the door. He found the old housekeeper on the stone step outside the still room, the iron keyring shaking against her hip. She rose when she saw him, and the rising was difficult. The white lace cap sat crooked. "Your Grace, I should have come up. I could not. I am an old fool and a coward, and I let them take her." "Take her where, Mrs. Hollings?" "Lady Caroline came yesterday with the silver to be counted. She put a spoon in the girl's apron pocket, with the black ribbon wound about its stem. The constable was called. She was carried in the rain to York jail. Mr. Thorne went after the cart. He told me to tell you nothing until Lord Ashcroft was with you. He said you would burn the village if you heard it alone." Julian stood very still. The 3-fingered hand opened and closed once at his side. "I would have," he said. He turned. Ashcroft was already in the doorway with the portfolio. "Thorne is in York," Ashcroft said. "He will not let her be moved. We ride. We ride to London first." Julian. "To London first, Henry. We have a hearing in Hilary Term. We will be early." The next 8 weeks did not belong to the East Wing. They belonged to a small chambers in Lincoln's Inn, where Mr. Elias Thorne, in his long black tailcoat and tight white cravat, sat each morning at 6, with a candle and 3 clerks, and built, brick by brick, the case that would bury Caroline Fairfax. The 2 Harley Street physicians were visited at their consulting rooms by a duke whose scar was no longer covered by anything, and whose questions were not of a sort that admitted evasion. By Friday, both had withdrawn their affidavits in writing, and one had sailed for Boulogne. The steward Silas Wren was found at an inn near Doncaster with a portmanteau of banknotes and a passage booked for Hamburg. He was brought back in a closed carriage by 2 of Lord Ashcroft's grooms, and what he signed in Thorne's chambers covered 11 pages and named every entry in the ledger. Sophia was brought out of York Gaol on the third morning by Mr. Thorne himself, who carried the warrant of release in his brown leather portfolio and a clean grey cloak over his arm, because the dress she had been arrested in was wet through. He did not take her to Ashfern. He took her, by the Duke's exact instruction, written in the Duke's own slow left hand, to the house of Lord Ashcroft's widowed aunt in Cavendish Square, where a fire was lit and a bath drawn, and a room kept ready, and where a letter waited on the writing table, in a hand she did not yet know. The letter said only this: "I am not asking you to come back. I am asking you to let me prove, to a court and to you, that what was done to you was not done by my house but against it. When it is finished, you will choose. Julian." She kept the letter in the pocket where the spoon had been. She did not write back. But on the morning of the hearing, when Mr. Thorne called at Cavendish Square to ask whether she would consent to be present as a witness, she put on the grey wool dress that had been mended and the clean apron and the cap without lace, and she went. She sat at the back of the panelled room in the chancery, and she watched, without moving, as the petition that would have buried a man alive was struck out with one stroke of the Lord Chancellor's pen, and as the ledger was entered into the record, and as Caroline Fairfax, in a Wedgwood blue gown that was suddenly the wrong color for the room, was named in open court as the author of frauds amounting to £2,400 against the Ashfern estate. The criminal indictment came 3 days later. The fire at the Ashfern stables, 1824. Manslaughter of the Lady Eleanor Blackwell. Caroline did not stand for that one. She fainted and was carried. By the time of the winter ball at Ashcroft Hall, on the eve of Christmas, she had been deserted by her aunts, struck off the visiting books of 3 duchesses, deserted by the cousin in Yorkshire who had once lent her the cameo brooch, and removed by warrant to the Marshalsea prison for debts amounting to £4,000, every farthing of which had been quietly purchased the week before by an agent acting for the 6th Duke of Ashfern. She would, Mr. Thorne said dryly over his spectacles, have a long time to consider her gowns. The ballroom at Ashcroft Hall was lit by 900 candles in 3 chandeliers and by the silver branches at every pier glass, and the floor had been chalked that afternoon in a pattern of foxes and swords for the house that was being, this night, restored to the world. The orchestra was tuning. Half the county had come, partly out of curiosity and partly because Lord Ashcroft's invitations were, this season, the only ones worth refusing nothing for. The double doors opened at the head of the stair, and the room went, by degrees, quiet. Julian came down alone. He wore black, severely cut, a white waistcoat, and a plain white cravat tied once. He had shaved. The hair had been cut to the collar. The silver, ridged scar from temple to jaw and down the neck to the right shoulder was uncovered, because he had decided, in a small room in London 6 weeks before, that he would never again allow a piece of cloth or a fall of hair to apologize for it. The 3 stiff fingers of his right hand rested on the banister. He did not hurry. A dowager near the orchestra lifted her fan and lowered it and did not lift it again. He crossed the floor to where Lord Ashcroft and Mr. Thorne stood by the great fireplace, and he turned and he waited. The doors at the head of the stair opened a second time. Sophia Whitmore stood at the top in a gown of antique bronze silk that had belonged, Mrs. Hollings had told her that afternoon with trembling hands, to the late Duchess of Ashfern in the year of her marriage. The dress had been let out at the shoulder and taken in at the waist, and it fitted her as if the dead Duchess had cut it for her. Her 4B coily hair was dressed high and held with 2 simple combs of jet. Her honey-brown skin caught the candlelight and gave it back warmer. At her throat she wore no jewel. On her left wrist, tied in a small firm knot over the bronze silk, was the length of black ribbon that had once been her mother's, that had been wound about a spoon, that had ridden in a cart through the rain, that had lain on a small parlor table for 8 weeks while a duke prepared a courtroom. She had asked for it back that morning. Mrs. Hollings had given it to her on the stairs and had not been able to speak. She came down the steps without hurry. She did not look at the room. She looked at the man at the fire. Julian crossed the floor to meet her at the foot of the stair. The orchestra had not begun. The room was as quiet as a chapel. He stopped before her. He did not bow. He went, instead, to one knee on the chalked floor, the 3 stiff fingers spread upon the white silk of his thigh for balance, the steel-gray eye lifted to hers, the silver scar catching every candle in the room without shame. "I have nothing to offer you," he said, and his voice carried because the room was holding still for him, that you have not already saved. The house is yours if you will have it. The name is yours if you will take it. The terms are yours. I will sign whatever you set before me. Be Duchess of Ashburn on your own conditions, Sophia, or refuse me here in front of every soul who watched you arrested, and I will accept that also, and I will go home, and I will keep the windows open. The dowager with the fan began, quite quietly, to cry. Sophia looked down at him for a long moment. The very firm, dark brown eyes did not lower. The full mouth with its serious corner moved at the corner only, the smallest possible amount. "Get up off the floor, Your Grace," she said. "You will ruin the breeches." He did not move. "Sit down first," she said, more gently. "We shall eat. After that, we shall dance." Julian rose. He did not take her hand at once. He turned, instead, to the orchestra at the far end of the room, and he nodded once. The first slow chord of a waltz unfolded under the chandeliers like a long-held breath let go. He offered her his left hand, because the right would not close. She took it. The black ribbon at her wrist brushed his cuff. They walked together to the center of the chalked floor, and the foxes and the swords were beneath their feet, and the room, which had not known how to look at either of them, learned, in the turning of a single measure, how. They danced once. Then they went, with Lord Ashcroft and Mr. Thorne, and old Mrs. Hollings, who had been brought down from Yorkshire that morning in a closed carriage and given a chair by the fire, to the long supper table in the small dining room, where a tureen of clear broth stood at one end and a covered dish of mutton at the other, and where a single place had been laid at the head for a man who had not, 2 winters ago, been able to lift a spoon. He sat. She sat beside him. She lifted the silver ladle and filled his bowl, and then she filled her own, and she set the ladle down. "Eat," she said. He ate. Outside, the bells of Ashcroft village began to ring for Christmas. Inside, in a ballroom lit by 900 candles, a length of black ribbon, frayed at one end, rested against the cuff of a duke who had, at last, been truly seen. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Has there ever been a sealed door in your own life, a room you were told never to enter, where the kindest thing you could do was open a curtain anyway? Has someone ever tried to turn your mother's ribbon into evidence against you, to twist a small, honest thing into a weapon? And when the truth finally arrived, did the person who had hidden in the dark for years find the courage to walk into the ballroom with his scar uncovered? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and love that arrives against all odds, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.